From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
A last-minute deal averts a national railway strike that would have done great economic damage nationwide. How did the deal get done? Plus, the war between the states over migrants gets more heated, if you can possibly imagine that. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis sends 2 plane loads of migrants to Martha's Vineyard, of all places, while Democrats in Chicago, District of Columbia, and New York City cry foul as migrants from Texas overwhelm their social safety nets. Is this a sanctuary city awakening about illegal immigration? Welcome. I'm Paul Gigot, here with my colleagues, Kim Strassel and Alicia Finley. Welcome to you both. Let's start with a tentative deal to avert the railway strike, tentative being the White House word for it when it announced the deal at 5 a.m. this morning. Huge sigh of relief, I'm sure, at the White House. We still don't know the details of what the final agreement said, but it looks like a pretty good deal, very good deal for the unions, Alicia.
Right. So what they had already negotiated, or most of the unions had already negotiated, was basically the biggest pay increase in at least 40 years since the deregulation of the railroads. This would include a 24% raise from 2020 to 2024. That would be retroactive and with an immediate increase of 14.1%, which is pretty huge, plus $5,000 bonuses over that time period. Now, it would also preserve the platinum health benefits that have the workers paying very little toward their benefits.
Those are almost Goldman Sachs level of benefits, aren't they?
I think they're even more goals than Goldman Sachs. Just to put this all in perspective, the railroad said that the deal that was on the table would have the average worker making about $110,000 in just pay by 2024. But then when you add in the retirement benefits and healthcare benefits, they would be making about $160,000 in compensation. So that's $50,000 per employee in terms of retirement and health benefits, which is very generous. I mean, unions generally do get very generous health and retirement benefits. They're defined benefit pensions, and that's a separate story that those pensions are having problems. But this was a very generous deal for the unions. There were a couple holdout unions, the locomotive engineers and the conductors, who wanted more flexibility and wanted 15 days paid sick leave that they could basically take on demand for any reason. This would hamstring railroads' ability to schedule trains and keep the trains running on time, so to speak. It would also be tremendously costly. 15 days of paid sick leave would essentially be 3 weeks off. And many of them already get, or most of them already get 3 weeks of paid vacation. And the more senior employees get 5 weeks of paid vacation on top of personal days.
Alicia, let me interrupt on here. Do we know yet what the final deal was on those paid sick leave days?
No, we don't. It's all been very hush-hush, but there was some concession that was made, and we don't know how large it was and whether the other unions will get them too. This will all end up being filtering back to the consumers because there's no such thing as a free paid day off.
Right, exactly. I guess the details will roll out, Kim, but I think the White House is elated, to put it mildly, that this strike, at least for now, will be averted. The union members will have to vote to approve the details of this agreement. So I suppose it could fall apart. But the White House, I'm sure, put the strong arm on the last 2 unions because the last thing they wanted was a strike that would disrupt trade, add to supply chain woes, and probably to prices. So my guess is at the end they said, look, from the White House, I don't know this for a fact, but my guess is they said, you guys better take this or we're going to have to intervene and stop a strike.
Yeah, they have to be happy for 2 reasons, both on the substantive economic point you just made, which is that approximately 30% of all freight in the country moves on rail. And we do not have the capacity to switch that over to the trucking industry. So this would have been devastating for industries, including farming, because a lot of fertilizer moves over rail, et cetera, livestock. And it would have then spiraled into shortages on the shelves, as you said, probably higher prices, costing maybe $2 billion a day. And that's probably a generous estimate. But also politically, by getting this done, and yes, I can imagine that those were some of the threats that were being levied, they are able to stay on side, as it were, with the unions, not have this major fight. The president obviously has claimed he's the most pro-union president ever. But if this strike had gone ahead, there would have been enormous pressure on Congress to intervene, because a lot of this is all done under the Railway Labor Act, which has different provisions that govern these union negotiations. And one of them allows Congress to vote to impose a longer cooling off period or even a solution to the problem. That would have put Democrats in a very tricky place, basically having to dictate to their union allies a negotiated settlement or simply not taking their side in the run-up to the midterms.
All right, let's turn to the war between the states over immigration. Border state governors, as we all know, under extreme pressure from the migrant flow, historically large migration flow over the southern border that's descending on their towns and cities, places like Yuma, Uvalde, El Paso, Del Rio, simply overwhelmed by the number of migrants they have to take care of. And it's burdening the state because the numbers are so high. And Governor Greg Abbott of Texas, some months back, decided to send buses of some of these migrants to cities that have called themselves sanctuary cities, cities like Chicago, New York, and the District of Columbia. And by sanctuary cities, they mean they won't cooperate with federal immigration officials to help deport undocumented migrants. So Greg Abbott said, well, let's see if you like what this is like for us. So he has sent the buses to these cities, and the cities are really squawking. And Ron DeSantis of Florida now has raised the political ante by sending 2 plane loads of migrants to Martha's Vineyard, and that has led to a new round of mutual recriminations and name-calling. First, let's hear Vice President Kamala Harris, who President Biden famously put in charge of the border, talking on Sunday about the secure border.
We have a secure border in that is a priority for any nation, including ours and our administration. But there are still a lot of problems that we are trying to fix, given the deterioration that happened over the last 4 years.
Well, Kim, first of all, why would Kamala Harris say the border is secure when it is so plainly not? It's basically like saying it's a sunny day and it's pouring outside. I don't get it politically. Why not admit at least some reality? She said, okay, well, there are a lot of problems, and then tried to say that they're related to Trump. I mean, you can blame Trump for a lot. You can blame him for all kinds of things. But he actually did a lot better job in terms of controlling the border than this administration has.
Oh, absolutely. It was almost like a light switch flipping when the Biden administration came in part because not just Joe Biden, but most of the people who had ran in the Democratic primary all broadcast their intentions to open the border and to have far more generous border policies, which obviously encouraged a lot of people to begin coming. And you saw these caravans. And by the time they realized what the mess that they had gotten themselves into, it was too late to stop some of them. And now word has spread, obviously, in many of the countries where these people are originating from, and the flood is seemingly unstoppable. The only reason I can assume that she would say such a thing is sometimes the situation is so bad, you just have to ignore it. I guess that is the political.
You just have to say, the sky is blue, and in fact, it's not.
and you know what? We've got this a lot from this administration. According to Joe Biden, there's not really a huge inflation problem. Things are getting better. You know, it's just they do a lot of the sky is blue when it's raining. So that's the only thing that I can assume is driving this. Also, and again, politically, because this is a bipartisan issue, meaning sometimes when you go and talk about issues of actual immigration reform in terms of pathways to citizenship, you get very stark partisan divides along that kind of 50-50. But when you start talking about the border, that is an issue that members of both parties care deeply about. It's something like 70% of people say it is a top concern and a worry for them. And so that's their political problem at the moment, is that they risk alienating even a lot of independents who don't like seeing these pictures of people pouring in and nothing being done.